So, of course, I did the usual thing and asked ChatGPT to tell me all about our guest speaker. So I could read that out, but I mean, it's rather long form. So when you've got the title of Chief Talent Scientist, I think that says a lot, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean? Talent and science in the same breath. But Tomas Chamorro Premuzic has a really, really broad portfolio of things that he's involved in. Not one to avoid a bit of controversy, so writing books with provocative titles like Why Do All the Stupid Men Become Leaders type thing. But particularly what we're going to focus on today is artificial intelligence and its part to play within the HR world. And I know Tomas does some lecturing on business psychology at places like University College London and Columbia University. And so one of the things that I guess Tomas is trying to do is give us a sense of how we navigate the world with AI, not just outsource to AI, but how we can kind of integrate it and build it into what we do. So Tomas has written a great book, which I've been recommending for a long time, because it is one of those kind of definitive ones, called I, Human. So I guess your mind goes to the movie I, Robot, doesn't it? So it's the kind of opposite of that. It's what happens to us. How can we strengthen who we are as humans at the same time as exploiting artificial technology and so on. So are we ready? And without further ado, then, we'll give him a rousing welcome, Tomas Chamorro Premuzic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Perry. Good morning to everybody. So one of the nice things about having good friends introduce you is a bit like, you know, your best man at a wedding, minus the embarrassing stuff. So thanks, Perry. My mom wasn't available, so I brought Perry. It's the next best thing. So I want to talk a little bit about the human impact of artificial intelligence. I'm sure most of you are already at a stage of AI overload. You're hearing too much about it. But I want to focus on a slightly neglected element of AI, namely humans. And I think it's first to state at the beginning, at the outset, that if you look at the brief or long history of human evolution, we actually have a pretty good track record of blaming our own inventions for our cultural demise. This has happened whenever we invented any disruptive or novel technology, any innovation. You can go back to ancient Greece, as with most things. So, you know, go back in time 2,500 years ago, where you find in Athens that Socrates and his fellow philosophers, think of them as the original hipsters. Right? They were opposed to the disruptive emerging technology of the time, which was writing, on the grounds that it would atrophy or ruin memory. So famously, Socrates himself refused to write anything down, to the point that some even contest whether he actually existed or was the original footnote of Plato, or to Plato. Fast forward to the 17th century, and when the first newspapers were invented in Germany, critics lamented that they would kill social gatherings. Why meet, they thought, after all, if there's no news or gossip to exchange? Right? So they assumed we're going to become massively antisocial and stay indoors reading the papers. And most notably, in the last 100 years, we spent a lot of time critiquing and lamenting the rise of any form of mass media. It was first the radio, then cinema, then television, from the 80s onwards, video games, and of course, most recently, social media and other AI-fueled tools or technologies. So it should really come as no surprise that the overall sentiment towards AI is largely negative, unless you're in the business of selling AI, in which case you tell everybody that it's the best thing since sliced bread and it's going to make us happier, fitter, more productive. It's probably 5% of the population. I would say 80, 85, 90% is mostly negative. And it's a shame that there isn't much room for a nuance or a moderate discussion. I'm actually considering my next book title to be on radical moderation, because we lost that in a world that is always very extremist in its views or attitudes towards everything. So in this brief talk, I want to address 3 areas of concern, of popular concern or criticism about AI that are commonly heard and talked about or discussed in the media. The first is this notion that AI is going to lead to, as Yuval Harari said, a useless class of humans. In essence, automating us and making us irrelevant or useless. I think if you take out the possibly only worst scenario of autonomous killer robots. This is probably the second worst. If you want to start, in an upbeat way, we'll talk about that. Second one is the idea that AI will introduce bias to human society. So in essence, introducing, augmenting, perpetuating prejudice, discrimination, and so on. And the third is this notion that AI is actually making us antisocial. So I want to unpack each of these three claims and talk about what's substance and what's hyperbolic exaggeration here. Starting, of course, with automation fears. I think probably most discussions on AI, if you have a continuum that goes from automation to augmentation, you can spot or plot where people are, at least with their rhetoric or discussion on this. There is no shortage of predictions of what is going to happen to jobs, occupations, careers in the next few years, whether it's from BCG, McKinsey, Bain, EY, Deloitte, etc. If you look at our recent history, what you can see is that most of these predictions are totally off and totally wrong, but nobody bothers checking, which is a shame. My advice to you, if you want to become a predictions guru, always pick outcomes that are at least 50 or 100 years into the future, so everybody's dead, and even if they wanted to check that you were wrong, they would have forgotten if they are alive. Most notably, 10 years ago, there was a famous book that kickstarted the big data movement. It seems now like an anachronism to talk about big data, but remember, big data is what fuels AI. And in that book by the Oxford Internet Institute, people predicted that by the year 2023, 40 to 50% of the professions that existed then, 10 years ago, would be gone. The actual figure was 6%. Right? And now we see all these wild predictions, bold predictions about what's going to happen to jobs. What we can tell from the data that we actually have, because nobody has data on the future, is that there are two main trends that we can expect to extrapolate or transfer into the future. The first is that AI doesn't eliminate that many jobs. What it does eliminate, and this is the case also for generative AI, is tasks within jobs, changing the skills constellation needed to perform those jobs. So it's a cliche to say that we're all less likely to lose our jobs to AI than another human using AI if we don't, but that is correct. More importantly, we all need to reimagine how we add value, how exactly we add value in our current or existing jobs. And that obviously has massive upskilling and reskilling implications because, and there we go into the second trend, even when AI does eliminate entire jobs or occupations, which would probably be in the single figures, single digits, it creates many more new jobs in turn and at a faster and higher rate. But of course, most people who are displaced from the previous jobs don't automatically have access to the new jobs that are created. So again, this was true before, even in the first wave of the digital revolution. If people start buying things online and there's less need for brick and mortar stores, you need fewer brick and mortar store managers, but we need digital marketeers, cybersecurity analysts, and AI ethicists. You can never have enough ethicists, by the way. So, but if you were a brick and mortar store manager, you can automatically become a cybersecurity officer, a digital marketeer. AI ethicist, maybe yes, if you have a good kind of a discourse, a narrative. Nobody can prove you wrong. So those are the two big trends. And I think, one of the problems that needs to be acknowledged is that historically, people are not very good at understanding their own talents and their own potential, which is why we use assessments, or we have historically used assessments, science-based assessments, 360s, etc., to basically tell people what they're good at. Some of you may have recognized this if you have read Walter Isaacson's very good biography on Leonardo. This is one of the oldest application letters that we have on record. Leonardo leaves his small town of Vinci in Tuscany to move to Florence and applies for a job with one of the dukes of Florence or Tuscany and write basically, there wasn't LinkedIn, so he writes a letter saying, here's everything I can do, and lists his top 10 competencies. Things such as, I can dissect dead animals. I can tell you why birds sing. I can draw complicated military equipment and 7 other things that would make him utterly unemployable today, but apparently they were hot skills back then. And after signing, yours truly, Leonardo, says, P.S., by the way, I can also paint. Right? So that was his ad hoc, if needed, if there is a painting job out there, I can do something. So if we think about the fact that even extraordinary polymaths weren't really aware of their skills and the demand for those skills or lack thereof, imagine how complicated life is for the modern person who isn't a polymath and who has to constantly read and educate themselves about the squiggly landscape of careers, career pivots, demands, etc. is very, very complicated. At some point, all the data that we have already given away for digital marketing targeting purposes will be able to be recovered. I mean, in fact, if you look at what organizations are doing when they're training generative AI with their own data, it's an attempt to basically have a quantitative and objective model of somebody's potential that can give people feedback on their soft skills, on their dispositions, on their abilities, and match them to jobs. In fact, there's lots of data on this. Your Uber rating probably tells me a lot about your emotional intelligence. Your Amazon history tells me a lot about your compulsive nature or your impulse control or your self-control. Your Netflix and Spotify playlists or activities tell me a lot about your curiosity, and we won't talk about things like Tinder, etc. But there's a lot you can tell about people's soft skills based on their digital footprint. So that's the automation kind of myth debunked, I think, or there's certainly no need to be very fearful about that. Again, and there's a lot of macroeconomic data on this. So for the past 20 or 30 years, the 2 most technologically advanced societies in the world, which are probably South Korea and Japan, have seen unemployment levels go down and down and down. In Japan, they automated everything. They automated, everything, and still unemployment levels go down. But what about the other, if this is the sort of dystopian end of the continuum, what about the utopian one? What about this notion? We hear a lot of CEOs, a lot of executives saying, okay, now, where are the productivity gains? We should see AI, Gen AI, lead to an unprecedented sort of transformative productivity boost. And again, I think this needs to be debunked. Because first of all, if we look at what happened again in the first wave of the digital revolution, we saw productivity defined both in terms of output or in the correct way, which is output divided by input, go up between 2000 and 2008, when obviously more people started to become connected and use the internet, and we shifted from dial-up to Wi-Fi phase, only to stagnate after that. What happened in 2008? Not just a financial crisis, but smartphones become ubiquitous. They become, not just a computer in people's pockets, but also a weapon of mass destruction, right? And this is important because most people interact with AI, not with generative AI or large language models, ChatGPT, as Perry is doing right now. Most people are not like Perry. Most people interact with AI through algorithmic nudges and basically destruction tools that are not really a productivity tool. They're an unproductivity kind of tool. They're, again, a weapon of mass destruction. So some data to back this up. So we know that around between 60 and 85% of smartphone use occurs during working hours, irrespective of whether people are working at home, working from the office, or working from anywhere. 70% of workers report to being distracted. In the US alone, this amounts to something like $650 billion a year in productivity loss, which is 15 times higher than the productivity loss due to absenteeism, turnover, and wellness issues. I know many of you care about wellness and well-being, a booming industry, but nobody takes this into account. How unproductive people are because, they are perpetually distracted. Multitasking, which we all do, and some of you might be doing now, if you don't care about, wounding my ego and you're not pretending to pay attention, deducts the equivalent of 10 IQ points from our performance. When you basically are working on a task, and then you get distracted, and you return to that task, you will lose an average of 20 to 25 minutes of performance there. So it's basically as debilitating as smoking weed. As I tell my students, if you multitask while smoking weed, that's probably 20 points even if you feel more creative, but you might not be. So it's, multitasking is like smoking weed minus the benefits. The average human alive will waste something like 8 hours on social media today, and about 20 to 21 years, 8 years of their life on social media, 20 to 21 years of their lives on screen time. So it's basically, more than a quarter of our life. So sometimes, you can become more productive by using technology, but a lot of the times in our current time, you become more productive by ignoring technology as well. Lots of data suggests that most of the use of generative AI at work today is happening in clandestine ways. People are basically becoming more productive in the sense that they're achieving the same level of output, but decreasing their input. That, by the way, is the best way to boost your productivity. Work less. If you look at data from the most productive countries, Scandinavia, even Germany, they work less, because if you work less, you waste less time. And actually, again, productivity is output divided by input. So if your input basically goes down, you're more productive. Countries that work long hours, very long hours, like Japan and the US, are not productive because you can't focus and you waste a lot of time. So people are becoming more productive in the sense that they're achieving the same level of output while decreasing their input. And when they are saving 30, 40, 50% of their time because everything is outsourced to ChatGPT, they're not running to their boss saying, hey, I now have 40 or 50% of my time free, can you give me more work? Right. Which would actually also create more work for their boss, who is also outsourcing management to ChatGPT. So this is the scenario that you have. Yeah? We talk about AI hiring AI, but there's also AI managing AI, and AI, your AI emails my AI, and my AI response. And then we have to work out what to do, in what new ways we're going to add value. So even in the early days of the pandemic, when offices shut for the first time, and many people who weren't used to working from anywhere or working from home had to go to the office, had to go home or leave the office for the first time. I remember a colleague of mine saying, but without the office, how will I pretend to work? Right? Because of course, it's a cynical statement, but a lot of the time that people spend at work, they spend engaged in the performative aspects of job performance, not actually performing their job. So actually, the interesting paradox is that in the beginning, people embraced working from home because the prospect of having analog colleagues come in 3D physical environments and annoy them and distract them with their gossip or news was seen as something that could decrease their productivity. Now, if you look at the data on working from anywhere or working from home, once you partial out commuting time, which in big cities is between an hour and 2 hours a day, people are actually less productive at home because they're bombarded with AI is a much more powerful distraction than your annoying colleagues who come to see you and get the signals probably that you want them to leave, for those of you who still visit an office. So that's productivity, and let's talk about bias, right? So whenever, I think after productivity, after the automation, augmentation question, and by the way, it's interesting that even those who still promote or kind of glorify and talk about the automation promise, the augmentation promise, they're now saying, oh, the augmentation or the productivity gains from AI are not going to be directly coming from AI. They come from us reinvesting the time people save on low-value activities in more useful, fulfilling, and intellectually, interesting things. So basically, the AI opportunity becomes a management problem or a management challenge, right? If we assume that the time you're not spending on low-value tasks, you're now going to be more productive by elevating your job. It's a massive, again, reskilling and upskilling imperative. So what about bias, which after productivity and automation augmentation is, I think, the most widely discussed, right? This idea that, of course, because AI models are usually trained with data that is derived from human preferences, AI can only be as objective as humans, which basically is not very objective at all, right? I mean, of course, when human preferences or human ratings are used to train AI on relatively non-controversial issues, like when you have micro workers train self-driving cars or autonomous vehicles on whether something is a traffic light or a tree, humans can be quite objective about this, because let's face it, people don't have very controversial opinions about traffic lights or trees. Maybe trees a little bit, because you get into climate, but traffic lights, it's like either it's a traffic light or not. But when you're training AI to identify whether somebody is a good employee or a bad boss, it becomes quite contentious. And of course, we have seen cases of or AI experiments backfire precisely because if you introduce noisy, corrupt, or rubbish data into the system, you will not just get that as output, but it will be augmented, exacerbated, etc., and so on. But in those cases, AI is not so much the creator as it is the exposer of bias. So for example, if we look at the famous prominent cases of Microsoft and Amazon training a chatbot, so earlier version than now ChatGPT, to recommend who gets promoted, and the AI recommended a surplus of middle-aged white engineers. I hope there's none here. If so, this is a pedagogical figure of speech. I'm not, and it's not a bias against you. And they said, oh my God, we're not going to use the AI because it's sexist or racist. If you don't use the AI, middle-aged male white engineers still get promoted because the bias is not in the AI, it's in the culture, right? Equally, some of you might remember that we had this problem about 10, 15 years ago when people realized that if you type in women are, or you can do the same with any kind of group of people that has historically been the target of prejudice, discrimination, they said, oh my God, Google's AI is sexist because there were all these horrible things coming up in the autocomplete. And in fact, some people even argue that there is, a secret cult-like group of bros in Silicon Valley wearing hoodies trying to bring down women in the world. And they're viciously programming the AI to say bad things, nasty things about women. No. The AI is successfully and accurately representing what people in the world think about women in general, which is no longer the case. That's why you only have mostly really good things being said. It's not that Google has solved sexism in the world. They basically are censoring the content. And this is basically what happens. It's a very, very interesting point, I think, that is what happens with generative AI. There are so many guardrails now that are introduced that everybody is unhappy. Because on almost any issue, it will say, well, this is a contentious issue. Tell me about Adolf Hitler as a leader. Well, I'm just a large language model. Some people say he was very good. Some people say he was, okay. So the guardrails are so extreme that inevitably people on the left accuse it of being right-wing, people on the right accuse it of being woke. It's a little bit like the BBC, right? And that it makes everybody unhappy because it tries to be objective, which actually tells you how biased we are. That when we don't recognize or have our bias reflected in generative AI or in AI, we automatically accuse it of being biased. And so, I think the point here is very, very clear. Well, first, I think we have to acknowledge that AI algorithms, technology, software code, can never be truly biased in a human way. Even if AI advances a lot, algorithms, they will never have a fragile self-esteem that they need to inflate by bringing other people down, or maybe other AI down. That would be a nice thing, I think, idea of neurotic AI, imagine, right? Algorithms that are petty and competitive and trying to bring down. It's a nice sort of poetic idea, but it's not going to happen. And even if so, they don't truly have a fragile self-esteem like us. And the second is that human beings have done a wonderful job refining and perfecting their biases for millennia without the help of AI or any other technology. From an AI point of view, it will be very easy to retool, retrain, or tweak any model to recommend people not what they like, but what they should consider in order to become a more open-minded version of themselves. Think of it as open-minded AI as opposed to open AI, right? So imagine if you have your Spotify, your LinkedIn, your Twitter, your newsfeed, your media consumption, even your Tinder and mobile dating kind of apps. They're going to stop giving you what you like and give you something that you really don't like, but should consider if you want to become a more open-minded version of yourself. If you did that, and there have been various experiments of even exposing people for 1 week to somebody else's kind of media filter bubble or echo chamber, people are shocked, they're horrified. It would lead to a mass exodus of these platforms onto some that tell us what we want to hear in what we want to see, right? In fact, in the infamous Cambridge Analytica fiasco or scandal, which of course you will know, voter manipulation, harvesting illegally profiles of people on social media, inferring what people's political orientation would be to target them with fake news and then do embezzlement, bribery, so a lot of, law and ethical violations. But if you read the white paper and the research report, it says very clearly that in every country where they try to do it, the percentage of people who are deemed persuadable is always the same, 15% tops. Contrast this with the number of people, the percentage of people who in self-report surveys from behavioral science and psychological experiments describe themselves as open-minded, 85%. Okay? So blaming AI for our own biases is a very good way of not addressing those biases and basically not seeing them as biases at all. And so let me now talk about the third point, which is whether AI is making us more antisocial. And this is the one that really has more substance. Not that AI has created the current sort of narcissistic epidemic that characterizes most cultures, not just Western culture and Hollywood culture or lay culture, but really that's spreading throughout the world. But actually, you can think about AI as basically throwing gasoline to the fire. We know from studies going back many decades that narcissism levels have been increasing. So narcissism basically is characterized by two fundamental patterns. One is a distorted, unrealistic, inflated sense of self-worth or self-concept, and the other is lack of empathy. The lack of empathy stops you from getting feedback from others. And the first one, most people really are sort of insecure or neurotic narcissists. So you think about David Brent or Michael Scott from The Office, right? So they think highly of themselves, but aren't really persuaded. So they constantly need to interpret other people's signals as positive or surround themselves with people who can inflate their egos. That has been going on for many decades. In fact, on measures of clinical narcissism, if you go back to the 1940s and you ask people in their 20s, are you destined to be famous? Only about 20 to 30% of people said yes. In the 50s, that increased to 40%. In the 80s, it increased to 50 to 60. Now it's 85%. So 85% of people in their 20s say yes to I'm destined to be famous. What happens if you really believe that is you become entitled. Entitled is high aspirations coupled with a low work ethic. And AI enters this picture, which was already quite bleak, and basically what it does is it fuels or exacerbates or increases this digital narcissism. Narcissism is the common etiquette in digital forums, right? It's, again, for how many people still work in an office or visit an office, a 3D office, okay? So, and I guess most of you are hybrid, but for those of you who go to the office or remember what that was like, in an office, if you visit, a 3D working environment, and you go around telling everybody how amazing you are, mansplaining everything or telling everybody all your thoughts, unsolicited opinions about everything, not listening to anybody, and of course, telling everybody what your cat had for breakfast on the weekend, you'll be deemed pretty obnoxious and annoying. But in the digital world, you'll be made an influencer. And AI fuels or rewards, these inappropriate self-disclosure and unsolicited kind of self-promotion to the point that you have to do it, you have to do it, you have to do it. All while we're saying, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have humble leaders and humility is a key asset and strength and so on. Even ChatGPT, which is very human-like, not just in the sense that it has become very good at hallucinations, which is euphemism for bullshitting, and really makes people territorial, because we thought bullshitting was a uniquely human skill. But now AI can do it, and it can do it much better than us in many more creative ways. Even if you look at the personality of chatbots or large language models like ChatGPT, it's basically like an insecure narcissist. It's very good at being human-like, in the sense that whatever you ask it to do, it will say, well, I don't know anything about the topic. I'm just a large language model. My training data stopped in 2021. But nonetheless, I will give you a lot of information. So more confident than competent, and I think the description of it as mansplaining as a service is a very good one. I also like stochastic carrot and calculator for words, so which is very important, and we'll talk a little bit about the importance of understanding soon. So what are the main conclusions? I think it's clear to me that the more AI resembles us, the less we like what we see in the mirror when we look at our reflection through the lens of AI, right? Which I think gives me some hope, because it shows me that we're not totally detached from reality and still capable of some self-awareness and some self-critical understanding of our virtues and flaws, or opportunities, since we are in HR circle, right? So opportunities, nice euphemism for flaws. This, I think, also speaks to the main real opportunities, and I'm going to be prescriptive rather than predictive here, of where the human opportunity lies. The first, I think, clearly is to harness the skills AI is unlikely to develop, or to emulate, or to replace. I say probably not master, because we don't know, of course, how AI will unfold. And so things like empathy, curiosity, self-awareness, creativity, self-control, emotional intelligence, understanding. AI is really good at explaining without understanding. It can explain everything without understanding anything. Granted, some people are like that as well, right? But the capacity to truly understand something, including other people, which is where empathy comes in, might be a non-replaceable human skill that we need to develop. Of course, it's not for granted that we're going to displace. When people tell me, oh, AI is good, but it basically is not funny, it's not creative, it doesn't show empathy, emotional intelligence, humility. I say, well, most people don't show any of these things either on a typical working day, which doesn't mean that we can't. Then now there's an extra incentive for doing that. And I say probably not developed, because you've seen already impressive, very simple examples of this version of AI emulating things like empathy. In the US, there was a big study done last year where top doctors, physicians, outsource patient communication to ChatGPT, and patients experience 40 to 50% higher levels of empathy while talking to an AI. Right? Not because the doctors are psychopaths or cannot display empathy, but because they're focused on other things, right? Focused on other things. But implications, if you want to see how this impacts the profile of future or even current managers or leaders, well, they're not going to be hired on their IQ. They're going to be hired on their EQ. They're not going to be there to solve algorithmic problems that AI can do. They're going to be there to connect, inspire, enthuse, and bring the human and humane factor. The second implication is that AI has already disrupted or changed the meaning of human expertise. Expertise used to be about having the answers to a lot of questions. It is now about asking the right questions. In fact, even prompting AI can prompt itself. So even like you have to be better at prompting, or prompting AI to prompt itself better. But in essence, now expertise is not about knowing the answers to a lot of questions. It's about basically knowing where the AI is wrong when it goes from data to insights. So calling the AI out on its hallucinations or BS shows that you have expertise. This was already true with Wikipedia. If you had no expertise on, let's say, medieval history, and you said, oh, I'm going to go to Wikipedia, now I'm going to go to ChatGPT, after 2 minutes, you can persuade yourself into thinking that you're now an expert, right? But if you actually have some expertise, you'll say, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, and you can vet. Yeah. So humans editing AI is an important feature of expertise. Likewise, social proof and demonstrating to others that your opinion is better or more accurate than what they can crowdsource through AI is also important. And of course, if AI automates, first wave of AI is a prediction machine, automates the passage from data to insights. Current wave of AI, generative AI, is a production machine, automates the passage from insights to action. That's still the space that is left for humans to play with, right? So being smart, being an expert is making smart decisions on the insights that you get when you prompt the AI correctly. And I also think, and this is, some of you might wonder, why do you have that picture there? Because I think, AI is basically the intellectual equivalent of the fast food industry. It can give you synthetic knowledge, mass-produce ideas. Within the AI industry, generative AI is basically a microwave for ideas. When people are like, oh, I did this presentation in just 2 minutes, you can tell. You can tell. Thank you for telling me, but I could tell. I mean, just like you wouldn't invite somebody to your home and impress them with a microwave meal, right? If it's high value activity and impact, please don't copy paste from ChatGPT. I mean, do something that adds value at least, or use it. So I think there is this really interesting kind of analog here, whereby, you know, in a way, you know, just like the fast food movement, which was very, very big, led to the farm to table and slow food movement, maybe this will push us to think more. But there's also the risk that in the short term, it would actually make us think less. Because if we think about it, we have now automated what behavioral psychologists call, Kahneman and Tversky call, system 2 thinking. System 1 was already think fast, without thinking, intuitive decisions, and now we automated thinking. So basically, we have an opportunity to not think at all, which is not very nice or not very useful, right? So I think, you know, the imperative is to develop deep expertise and invent the intellectual equivalent of farm-to-table slow food movement. Because like a fast food, you know, ChatGPT and generative AI might be tasty, addictive, cheap, but not very good for your hungry mind, right? The third implication, I think, is that there's already been a revaluing or revaluation of the analog world, the so-called experience economy sometimes. I talk a lot about this in my latest book, how, you know, I mean, if AI is hiring AI and AI is emailing AI and AI is coaching AI and, you know, there's so much noise, etc., that is introduced, at some point, we're going to have to be somewhere in analog terms and connect to other humans in analog terms. The increased proliferation and sophistication of deep fakes, I mean, already it's very difficult sometimes to know whether you're dealing with a human or not. So I think, you know, analog experiences are being revalued. We mostly have a recruitment business in Manpower Group, most of which is heavily impacted by technology. But if it gets to the point that candidates can send 5,000 job applications that are all perfect to all the jobs, you know, they went from not being qualified to now being perfect, to the point that recruiters can only use AI to assess those. At some point, people are going to meet for coffee and have a chat, right? Same in education. Educational institutions, most of them went from trying to ban ChatGPT and large language models to now it's out of control. But, you know, I have many friends who were first very proud that their kids are in Ivy League schools or Oxbridge and top universities. And then their kids are saying, you know, I did my essay with generative AI and I got an A. Probably their professor also graded it with generative AI. So I think it's very interesting to think that everything that can be automated must be automated because it's predictable, it's standardizable, and actually it has no value. But then we need to think, what's the new value activity that will come, right? Even in areas like human creativity, you know, Spotify has so much data on its artists that it could automate 90% of musicians. In some instances, it might be a good thing, right? I mean, elevator music happened before AI, and it's like AI before AI, right? If you listen to it, it's like there's a formula. So even if Spotify automated 100% of its artists, it wouldn't kill musical creativity. It would push musicians to invent something else. And that's easier to say in artistic professions than in HR or normal jobs, but the same logic will apply. And the last one is more like a wish than a prescription or prediction. I think it's very important first to understand that AI is in its infancy. This is the dial-up phase, so Wi-Fi phase hasn't arrived yet. By the way, so far all the benefits have been more in terms of speed, cost, and efficiency, not so much in accuracy. That might be the Wi-Fi phase of AI. But it is work in progress. It is a work in progress. And the ultimate and immediate goal for AI is not perfection, total perfection. It's better than the status quo. It's finding better ways of being wrong, right? So just like when one self-driving car crashes, people are shocked and think, oh my God, we should never have AI drive cars or self-driving cars or autonomous vehicles. But they're perfectly happy with 1.3 million people being killed courtesy of human drivers every year. There's an equivalent for that in the world of interviewing, coaching, developing, managing, etc. So the goal is not perfection. It's better than the status quo, which is often a very low bar. Okay, so abandoning double standards where we expect perfection from AI, but quite inadequate levels of performance from humans would be good. And if you want to read more, I have some totally unbiased book recommendations for you, not by AI, but by my objectives. Here are some books on this and other subjects, and I think we have time for a Q&A. Thank you.
Fantastic. I went to a conference in Norway at the beginning of May, and I used AI real-time translation. So what was really good about that is I could go back to the real-time translation to pick up all the cool sound bites and the links that had stored inside that real-time translation. So I'm hoping if you were using an AI tool, you've now got lots of Tomas's sound bites, because there were so many of them. But yeah. I think before we go into questions...
And don't check anything for accuracy, please.
I did it. I did it, actually. I did the $650 billion distraction, and it absolutely confirmed it. And it actually even told me that works out at $4,500 per year per worker in the US. So I think that's a really interesting ad that I just did there. So I fact-checked Tomas, and he passed the test. And then I even got a different statistic for it. I think the most crucial thing, I think, out of all of that, before we go to questions, is AI is a management challenge. That's what we're talking about here. How do we manage it? How does it impact on what we do in terms of managing both people, process, outcomes, and so on? So who's got a question? An analog question that they want
or
to
AI,
ask.
We want to be inclusive and allow any generative AIs to be part of this discussion as well.
Yeah, I've got one stacked up, but Eric's got a question. Go for it.
Yeah.
Will there be a mic, or do we have a...
Here's a mic right behind you.
It depends if we like the question.
Yeah.
If not, we deplatform you. Yeah.
Super. Thanks, Thomas. That was awesome. First of all, I am a white male, middle-aged engineer.
Yeah. Well done.
It's like Alcoholics Anonymous. Yeah. I want to start with a confession. I am a white.
So we have, in the West, we have a few massive vendors of AI, ChatGPT and OpenAI, Google Bard, and even yesterday it was announced that Apple is not going for their own, but they are going from ChatGPT. Yeah. What's your thought of that being that kind of monolithic approach to vendoring into this area?
Really good question. And I think, well, all of these companies or meta aggregators or foundational kind of engines of large language models have the same business plan or business kind of model, which is there are 3 layers of data that will feed that. You have basically the open source, scraping the web, everything that's out there kind of thing, and that will become increasingly commoditized. Then if you have a large organization or a repository of knowledge, IP, intellectual thing, you train it on that, which is usually less comprehensive but reduces noise and error, right? So imagine you're training a digital coach on a specific method, and they only do that. And then there's the individual level, which is we all have our own concierge-like AI trained on our data, right? I think, so they're all pursuing that, but if you look at the organizational or business implications for companies, organizations, it is clear that you will not, in the old days, you won in terms of how good your data science was, or your analytics team, or your ability to translate data into insights. Now there are only 2 things that make the difference. One is what's the unique data that you have, or the quality of your unique data that others don't have, right? And so, for example, I spent time with some of the big consulting firms, and they all tell me that they fed 20, 30 years of PowerPoint slides and emails to their version of that, and now they have the AI consultant that is the Accenture consultant or the EY consultant, etc. And if you compare them, they are the same. And I ask, is it better than the best consultant here? The CIO always tells me yes. The consultants say, no, of course not. They cannot compete with us, right? So, but quality of the data, especially unique data, is one. And the other, cultural readiness to go from insights to action or to manage the human-AI interface. AI itself is a commodity, becomes commoditized as that tool. So it's more the data. Like today, nobody goes for a job and says, I know how to use the internet. In the near future, nobody's going to go and say, hey, I use generative AI or know how to use it, whatever. Now there's still a little bit of differentiation on how you use it. And the how you use it part is important because people are not very good at self-regulating or learning by themselves. So what you have now is early adopters who are using it very well, and et cetera, and who might have access to better tools. People in the middle are kind of lagging. And cultural readiness means how can you basically bring people along and systematize that? The rest, NVIDIA is now worth more than Apple, right? And you can decide whether that's overvalued or not, but it all goes to certain rules. And of course, there's the question of what does it do to equality, to difference in valuation, performance of companies, et cetera, and then of course the environment, et cetera. But yeah, I think basically the simple answer is quality of your data that others don't have, and cultural readiness to go from data to actions better than your competitors. In a way, this has been happening in financial services. Most of trading is algorithmic. Everybody licenses the same data, banks, investment bank, whatever. But still, human expertise makes a difference. And actually, sometimes that will be human irrationality that will make the difference. This is a really, I think, beautifully poetic but important point, which is AI is trying to predict everything we do. So you have to become less predictable. And you become less predictable by doing crazy things. You know how they say they only call you crazy until you're a genius, but it's the same thing. Yes.
Here's Mike. Yeah.
So having kids and also being responsible for many employees and trying to incentivize learning, how do we avoid that we just get lazy in our mind because AI can answer all the questions. So how do we incentivize with kids and with all the others?
Yeah. And obviously there are parallels between children and employees. You know, people often say, treat people like adults and they will behave like adults. I haven't seen any data or evidence for that at all. I think if you treat people like children, eventually they might grow up, is what I would say. But you also, on laziness, you have to assume people are lazy. Efficiency is a euphemism for laziness. And technology, like productivity, is defined as doing more with less. We never invented any technology in our history to work harder, whether it's fire, the wheel, you know, the microwave, right? And so you have to assume that people are lazy. And so how can you incentivize? The advantage we have here that it's not so much in this specific area of using or interfacing with AI about skills. That's why it went viral. That's why it's the most highly adopted technology in recent history. So it's more about incentives. I think it's the most exciting and difficult time to be a chief learning officer or in the L&D space, right? But you have to incentivize people. How do you incentivize people? Well, you know, not just with reason, but also emotionally. Right now, people are freaking out because they think that this thing is coming after their jobs and that the same companies that are saying, oh, it's augmentation and, you know, we wanted to, are then firing people. You know, so I think you have to be honest. You have to bring people along. You have to ease their anxieties. You have to show them how they can do more with less. And then you have to take a deep look at their potential, at their interests, at their skills, and try to, you know, help them experiment and move around and try different things. Education is much harder because it's still the most overvalued thing in the world, offering the same value it has for the last 50 years, which is not much value at all. We can have a whole session on this. And I'm a hypocrite because I'm part of the system, but it needs to change, of course, because already before you had organizations saying, why am I paying so much money for entitled, overqualified graduates that don't know anything about the job? I'm going to have to teach them everything. Even education as a proxy for skill, it's not even evidence that the institution has done anything to develop hard skills or soft skills. You know, it's like basically they certify that these people, when they applied, were rich and hardworking and smart, and they still are 3 years later. If you think about that, I mean, skills-based hiring makes a lot of sense, and hiring on potential even more. But fundamentally, the psychological contract and the relationship with employees at the manager level needs to change. So I guess the short answer would be invest in middle management, the most underinvested and important part of the organization, because everything, you know, makes or breaks through middle management. They are responsible for engagement, morale, productivity. We don't invest in them at all. We kind of have this, like, we see them as a bastardized species. We talk about, leadership, vision, management, employees, management somewhere in the middle. Right? But it's so important, and poor managers today need to understand diversity and inclusion, neurodiversity, AI ethics, productivity, war, conflict, advocacy thing, and do their job. So, you know, helping managers to help people navigate the AI age is really important. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You only have to be better than your competitors. And
one over here, and then we'll...
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. It's really insightful. So my question is quite broad. And if you had the power, what 3 areas would you focus on when it comes to regulating AI?
Children, adolescence, and then I would say, data acquisition, and which actually GDPR to some degree covers, but I think what information we're scraping. I don't know if you read Jonathan Haidt's latest book, The Anxious Generation, which talks a lot about, he doesn't call it AI, but it's basically algorithms that create all these addictive issues, addiction problems, loneliness, depression, etc., epidemics, and that needs to be regulated for sure, So, but I think, regulation is actually doing pretty well, especially EU regulation, which then goes to New York and California, and then the rest of the US tends to follow it. We definitely need to unleash research, development, and experimentation, but then you need to regulate the application or usage of that, because you can't leave it up to people to self-regulate. It's too dangerous. Yeah.
So we've got one here, and then we'll wrap it up. So
okay.
Thanks very much for being patient there. Great.
Thank you for your presentation. Is there any link between climate changing and AI for human psychological?
For?
Human psychology.
Human psychology. AI destroys, it requires a lot of equipment, capacity, storage that is definitely very detrimental for the planet. And that hasn't been solved. And we're told, oh, we'll find a solution later. We'll ask ChatGPT, how would you? Yeah. But I don't know that even human psychology needs to come into play. That's the reality. And in that sense, it's no different from whenever other technologies, whether it's oil, gas, fracking, etc., there's always unintended negative consequences. And, it's possible that this will, I think, slow down some of the pace, but I don't think so. I think we had one, maybe a quick one, yeah.
Quick one there.
Quick one there, and then
we'll wrap up. Go for it.
So obviously you talk a lot to companies, to C-suites, right? AI, I think it's great, love the research, but what is truly the endeavor up in the C-suite to fix the problems that are already there? Because one of the issues I see that AI is just going to be taken or
yes.
just overlaid on all of the problems that already exist,
yes.
that you don't want to deal with.
Yes.
And especially to the book in the middle, how much more incompetence is going to be promoted by AI?
Yeah.
Because if you don't tackle the issues at hand, how can AI be, a success?
Yeah.
And not another waste of money, or we don't see the full potential of the goodness it can actually bring.
Yeah. Well, as you know, because you read the book, the how to fix it part is we become more data-driven, including use AI to select better leaders, because intuitively we've done a dismal job, or we are doing a dismal job. So I think Max Planck said, science progresses one funeral at a time. Leadership development advances one retirement or firing at a time as well, I think, is better than, selection prevents all the development needs. But I do think that you're making a very important point, because AI is the fundamental challenge that leaders have today. And I don't see them rise to the occasion. I see them either ignoring it and not being interested, or saying, okay, I want my productivity gains tomorrow. This is going to fix my problems. And it won't. It won't. And in fact, if there's one thing leaders can do, so not managers, is to really rehumanize work so that basically AI truly becomes a companion and not something that, So I see the level of also talking a lot about something is a really good way of not doing anything about it, right? A lot of words means little action. And I think, I think it's Peter Thiel who said the optimist and the pessimist are the same, basically, because the optimist said, well, everything will be fine. That's like C-suite is like, oh, okay, productivity will come, so I don't need to do anything. The pessimist is like, well, everything is, doomed, so I don't need to do anything. I think, again, moderation and having a more nuanced approach in this, and fundamentally for C-suite leaders, being problem-focused and solution agnostic and seeing can this help me deal with today's problem as opposed to, you know, postponing things for the future is the thing to do. Yeah. And I think we are basically on time.
That's it, we are done. Thank you very much for that last blockbuster of a question. I have this theory that leaders themselves hallucinate, a little bit like GPTs do, because when I ask them what they think culture is in an organisation, I get this hallucinogenic version, and when I ask the real people what culture is, they tell me what it's really like. So I think we burst that bubble, don't we? So thanks for that. Brilliant. So we now have some sessions that you should have on your agendas. I've got a tiny little roll call of people who are yet to pick up their agendas. So if Leontian, Marco, Tristan, Christina, Roger and Dogan are in the room, please go to the reception desk and pick up your agenda and badge. If you know where you're going, fantastic, go there. If you're staying here, stay there. But do you know what we ought to do is do that traditional analog three-dimensional thing of two hands together to thank our guest speaker today, Dr. Tomas Chamorro, Premuzic. Thanks very much. Thank you.